Hey everyone, in this lesson, we're just going to talk about story writing formula. Now, there isn't necessarily a tried and true formula for any kind of writing, but there are some basic structural things that you can do or details that you can include in a couple of different kinds of writing that are going to help you get started. I know it can be overwhelming when you're staring at a blank page, and that is why having some structure and ideas is so helpful in preventing writer's block and preventing you from getting overwhelmed and wanting to just run away and then never actually doing anything. So let's talk about a couple of different kinds. So I'm only going to cover 4 because we can't do it all. And these are sort of the main types of writing that I'm assuming people in this group are doing and that I've done myself. So opinion, personal essay, feature reporting, and blog posts. So let's start with opinion. This is sort of my specialty. I write a lot of opinion pieces. I am an opinion columnist at World Magazine. And so here is exactly how I do it. And I got this from actually the op-ed project. So I know not everyone is as familiar with the word op-ed, but it means opinion editorial. So I may say op-ed in the future, but I'm just talking about an opinion piece essentially. And sometimes it's also called like a reported opinion piece. So where you're reporting information, but also inserting your opinion in there. And so I use this basic structure every single time I write a new piece. I put these points down and I start to fill them in, just like the bare bones of what I kind of want to say. And this really helps me just build a strong foundation to where I can then go through and actually write what I want to write based on sort of the bones of it. And so usually I literally follow just exactly as this, and then I kind of write whatever. I let myself just go. Don't do a ton of editing while I'm writing. Then I go back through and sort of start to refine it. And I would say I read back through it 1 or 2 other times after that to make sure everything sounds good. So that is the gist of an opinion piece. They can be a little bit more cut and dry than other kinds of writing. And sort of finding the components that make a good opinion piece. I mean, takes a lot of practice, but this is the basic structure. And opinion is a great way to get bylines and get published. People like it when you have an opinion, when you're making an argument, when you have something to say that may be a little controversial. That is what a lot of newspaper columns like to publish, because they want dissent. They want readers to be engaged. And so when you're able to articulate an opinion that is unique, that is well stated and well preserved here, that is really a big opportunity for you. Let's talk about personal essays. So personal essays are a little bit more complicated. And I will say I don't have as much experience in them, but just from my experience and from research I've done, here are a few components of a personal essay. If you're looking to sit down and write one, here's what you want to include. So really with a personal essay, you've got to hook them in. Like a hook is always important no matter what you're writing, because you want people to read that first sentence and continue reading, right? But for a personal essay, it's less news driven. It's less going to be about some kind of crazy statistic or whatever, or some kind of crazy headline. It's going to be more about the writing. It's going to be more about how you draw them in with the creative and the artsy aspect of that essay. So thinking about what is that first opening line that is going to give them enough curiosity to keep reading, right? Then you might want to bring in sort of the topical relevance. Like, what are we talking about? What's going on here? Ground us in the details of exactly sort of what this essay is going to be about. And you can weave this in with the next part, which is your personal story. If you're writing a personal essay, then chances are this is a personal story of some kind that you are sharing. So, don't answer this question, why are you writing this like with a boring sentence, but think about how do you want to present this story and the reasons behind why you're sharing it, because you're not just sharing a story to say, here's the story, enjoy. You're sharing it because you have a point to make. And so think about what is that point you want to make, and how can you say that up front without giving away the whole essay or the whole point, which you will wrap up at the end. Theme. So this is really important because obviously when you're writing a personal essay, people that don't know you don't really care about your life specifically. They want to know how your story relates to their story and how it relates to a universal theme that many people can relate to. So you have to then introduce what is that theme? Is it forgiveness? Is it love? Is it anger? Is it restoration, redemption? Whatever the larger theme is, bring that in with a larger perspective or component to your story so that people can begin to see themselves inside of it. Next up is the connection and climax. So we usually think of story arc when we're talking about books, right? But story arc works for everything. And you could actually use an arc structure for even paragraphs or chapters of a book or within an essay. And so within an essay, you should have that connection and you should have that sort of climax in the middle where people are coming to that point where they're starting to get the point. And then, it's going to wrap up after that. So what is the personal and the universal connection in a sentence, a phrase, or a paragraph? That's sort of the culmination of everything that you're trying to say. And so bring people together here. Think about how are we drawing people into the story to this particular point, this particular thing we want to say, and then sort of slowly offering extra details and descriptive things that we want to say afterwards, but still keeping them curious. And that is sort of the details that comes next. So what are some of the statistics? What are some facts or other examples or ideas that you can bring in to sort of exemplify the universal theme that your personal story represents? Because we want to, again, paint it out for people so that they can see themselves in it. So always be thinking like, what are the other examples? What are the comparisons that you can make within the subject matter? So arcing down. So then you want to draw it back as you're getting towards the end to your personal story, maybe loop back around to what you began with to help readers begin to draw that full circle of the personal essay for you. Help them draw that. You help to draw that for them. And then expansion before your conclusion. So reflect back on that universal theme. Maybe you can tie it to the personal story or something else, but you want to draw back to the universal theme at the end, reminding them that this is about them too. And then conclusion, closing with a main point, lesson, sentence, always sort of trying to draw back in that personal element at the very end, so that people feel sort of a real conclusion to the essay, and also sort of feel like they've learned something. They're taking something away from this. Like you kind of package it up. Here's your last line that says the one thing that you want them to remember. So that is one way to look at a personal essay. I'm sure there are many opinions on how to do it. That is just my experience, and I wanted to share it with you. Features reporting. Okay, so this is big, and I'm not sure how many folks are going to be interested in this, but it is a really fun way of writing, and it is the way that you can get bigger stories. So like if you pitch a print magazine on a bigger story, like The Atlantic or something, they have really long feature stories. And so you want to kind of know what you're doing, especially if you have a big idea that's like a big topic that requires research and real in-depth reporting. Let's talk a little bit about what that looks like. I will say, if you really want to get into it, you should definitely get this book, which is The Art and Craft of Feature Writing based on the Wall Street Journal Guide. So such good stuff in there, and way more smart than I am on this. But when you're doing features reporting, I would say really important to have that incredible lead. Of course, you want to draw people in, as always, elicit curiosity about what you're going to talk about, ask a question that people really want the answer to. There are many ways to do good leads, and that's something that we don't have time to go into here, but if you're interested in that, you can look up some more info about it. Setting the foundation. Basic journalism: who, what, when, where, and why. So answer those questions. Try to do it in a well-written way, of course, in an interesting way, but get the basics and the foundation out of the way. You got to set the story for the reader. Introduce historical relevancy. I forget this one a lot, but it's so important. If you ever read any like longer feature stories, what you'll notice is that there's always like a paragraph or woven throughout the history of whatever it is they're talking about. So, they'll go back and say like where it began or how it's evolved or who were the main characters in the history of this particular issue and what's happened. And so they really sort of give you the context and set up what you need to know about this report, so that as you read forward, you're going to have that knowledge in your brain, and it's all going to make more sense and just kind of come together in a way that makes that's more clear. So then once you've done that, you want to develop and quote various sources and characters. So if you're doing features reporting, that means you've probably done quite a few interviews, which, this can be a long and tedious process, but it is important to get a full, well-rounded spectrum of interviews. And then also, developing characters. So if you're doing a longer feature report, you're probably going to have one or two people in there that are really sort of the archetype or the symbol of what you're writing about. And so you want to develop who those people are. You want to describe them. You want to sort of give an idea of like where they live, who they are, what is their environment, the way they speak, maybe some of the actions they take or gestures they make. So really be, even though it's nonfiction, really be thinking about how do we develop these people into actual characters and human beings that readers are going to be able to see and vision and really hear in their head. So that is an important part of it. Next up, facts and stats. Obviously, you're going to need a lot of this sprinkled throughout. There's always data on just God knows what, everything there's data on, you just got to find it. So sprinkling in those facts and those stats about whatever you're reporting on. For example, you can put it at like if a character has a quote about something, you might then follow up that paragraph with a statistic that makes sense or sort of is an accompaniment to what they're saying. So think about what goes together. But I would say collecting a bunch of stats for your features reporting so that you can sort of put them in where it makes sense is important. Alternate plot and character for balance. So when you're doing a long features report, it can be hard to sort of map it out. It's almost like putting a book together because it's very long and there's lots of material. But you want to keep the story going. So you want to, keep an eye on those characters and what they have to say and what they're doing, but also like what's happening with the issue at large and how are we moving the reader along through character development, but also plot development. What's happening in this story that you're reporting on? How are we moving people forward, keeping them curious and making them want to continue reading? So make sure you're alternating those things and then keeping the element of curiosity. I've already mentioned that a couple of times because it is just so important. So when you're thinking, say you have a couple sections or you have some subheads, how do you end that paragraph before the subhead so that someone actually wants to go on? Do you end it with a question or you end it with something that leaves the reader hanging? Just like in a book, you want them to keep going. And so being always conscious of that element of curiosity that's going to keep readers going down the page is a really important part of features reporting. Again, this is just like a minute little description, but I wanted to at least give you a layout of it. Okay, whoops. Wrong one. All right, blog posts, probably the simplest of all of these, but definitely something that hopefully you are going to be able to get bylines and make some money from. So I am basing this basically on a, like a 500, 700 word blog post, but here are just some of the things I would include if you're starting from scratch with a blank piece of paper. Here are the things you want to think about including in your blog post. So a lead, of course, always the lead, right? This one can be a little more boring, I would say, depends on, the blog or the website you're writing for, but just lead with that trending news or relevant information so people know what they're reading about. Next up, I might, depending on who you're writing for, I might add an anecdote, response, or argument from your perspective or the perspective of whoever you're writing for, sort of like give your opinion or give a feel for the angle from which you are coming. Now, some people are just going to want straight up sort of like news blogging, but a lot of places like, you're blogging about things that they are affiliated with or they care about. And so they may want you to actually add that opinion or perspective. And so readers are going to know where you're going. After you do that, you can introduce quotes, examples, or evidence for what you're writing about. If you've interviewed someone or you're taking a quote from the internet or another publication, giving examples of the argument or example you're making, and then offering evidence for what you're saying, whether that's a stat or historical evidence of some kind, you can put that in there. Then inside the blog post, much like you might do in an op-ed, offering ideas and alternative solutions or answers to the issue. So you're here saying, here's this thing that's happening, we do or don't like it. What are other ideas that might be a good companion to that? Or if you don't like it, what are the alternative solutions? What should we be doing instead? What other things can we propose in this blog post? Or what is the solution that you or your business or whoever you're writing for offers instead? Blog posts are often a way to really attract customers or attract clients or attract donors, followers, whatever. So thinking about those readers when you're writing this, counter any potential pushback. So it's always good when you're writing a blog post or an opinion piece. What are the pieces of pushback that people are going to have to say? Well, it's better, rather than ignore that those things are there, it's better to actually just bring them up and then push back. So you can't bring it all up, but many times the best idea is to bring up the almost like the best argument from the other side. So you're getting ahead of the game and you're saying, sure, there's this concern, but here's why that's not valid. So sometimes we want to run away from the pushback and what people will say, but it's actually better to get ahead of it, acknowledge it, and recognize why what you're saying is actually more beneficial. And then lastly, close by referring back to the lead in some way. You always want to close those blog posts with something that it kind of makes it just like a nice little finish and it doesn't seem like a random sign off. So that is all for sort of structure of different forms of writing. Again, people have all kinds of different opinions on this. This is just sort of one perspective on these, but a good foundation for those that are looking into it. And I would love to hear more from you guys about what kind of writing you want to do. So I'll see you in the next video.